Very well, ladies and gentlemen, we will get underway. A very, very warm welcome to the upper echelons of Olympia. Here we are, right in the top, in the corner. I started about half an hour ago by going into the wrong room, and they started miking me up, ready to go. And I was looking at the stage, thinking, this is not what I was expecting at all. And luckily, I spotted that it was an IBM session, and I left before the session began. I thought that could have been the most embarrassing career move of all time, to open the wrong session. But thankfully, I'm here, and hopefully I'm at the right place. Barcelona beat Manchester United. Is London to blame? Or indeed, London is to blame. But why strong localities really matter. That's what we're going to be talking about today. If you cast yourself back to the 27th of May and the Champions League final, Barcelona beat Manchester United 2-0. And Manchester United were trying to defend the Champions League winners' title for the first time, but they were failed and they were beaten by Barcelona. Well, we're going to ask the panel later on for their view on is London to blame on that. But more than that, really, we're here to talk about the government office network, the role it plays with localities and joining that up with government, and to really debate the key questions that you have on your mind. So today is going to be an opportunity for you to get involved in the debate with the panel, and I'll introduce those to you just shortly. My name's Kieran White, and I spend a lot of my time facilitating lots of big consultation events and seminars for government and public sector. So I'm delighted to be here today. Looking forward to the next hour and a quarter. I was getting really stuck into some of the interesting questions about devolution and localities. The format for this seminar, just to set your expectations about what we're going to do. Shortly, I'm going to invite Joe to speak on and to set the context, really, and to set us up, put some points and some thoughts to us. Then we're going to go straight out to the floor. I'll introduce the panel members to you, but we're going to ask you to help us and guide us in a debate. I want this to be a fantastic seminar. I want this session to really be driven and to get all of you engaged in it. So we're not looking necessarily just for questions. We're looking for your points of view. We're looking for your comments. And we're really just looking for you to get involved and have a great debate this afternoon with the panel. You have a quiz. So I'm going to quickly run you through that quiz if you haven't already answered it. We're going to just quickly look at some of those questions on the quiz. So the panel members, I don't believe you have the quiz because you're not allowed to enter. There's an iPod Shuffle up for grabs. We're going to be giving away an iPod Shuffle to somebody in this room at the end of this session. We're drawing a different one for downstairs so that people can keep entering down there as well. So for an iPod Shuffle, let's make a start then. So at the start of 2009-10 season, which region has more football clubs in the Premiership than any other? Okay, no, just write your answers on those pieces of paper. We're going to collect those shortly. So which one of those do you think it is? Question 2, the wingspan of the Angel of the North is greater than the height of the Statue of Liberty. True or false? Circle your answer or cross out the wrong one. You'll notice these questions are all regional, getting us thinking already about the regions of the UK. Question 3. This person was born in York, sailed from Hull, and had a friend with the same name as the day of the week. I will leave you to decide which of those is the right answer. Question 4. How many colleges make up Cambridge University? Don't know how many of you went. You remember or they were. Question 5. Which cathedral library is home to the earliest recorded Robin Hood rhyme? There's somebody here that doesn't want you to get this iPod Shuffle, I believe, by asking a question like this. Anyway, is it Lincoln, Ripon, or Nottingham Cathedral? Question 6. Which major city has more canals than Venice? Bristol, London, or Birmingham? A few more questions to go. Hope you're managing to keep up. Question 7. In what year was Brighton and Hove officially given city status? Which of those do you fancy? Question 8. Complete the famous quote by Samuel Johnson. And this is, when a man is tired of blank, he is tired of blank. I've always wanted to be a quiz show host, so there you go. That's my real opportunity. OK, question 9. Cornwall's population is smaller than that of Iceland. True or false? And the final question. In which region would you find Royston Vasey? Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Is it the Northeast, the East Midlands, or is it neither? We need your name and your contact details on there, of course. Somebody in this room will today get an iPod Shuffle. Very exciting. I will be running through the answers at the end of the session. So you may want to put some of those to the panel, perhaps, as part of the questions. There's a challenge for the panel. But we will be hearing the answers to those later on as we go through. So very good. Thanks for taking your time to fill that in. We're going to collect them. If you could pass those forms to the end of your rows. We've got a couple of people now walking around with bags. They're going to collect those from you to make sure we've got them. Very good. Now let me just tell you quickly then, the rest of the session, in a moment I'm going to introduce you to Joe Montgomery, and then we will be hearing from him, and then straight to the floor for questions from you. So please be thinking about the things you want to ask to get this debate underway. Your involvement is key. Very good. Well, I'll introduce you. Joe Montgomery is the Director General for Regions and Communities at the Department for Communities and Local Government. He's been there since 2001, when he joined as Director General for Neighbourhood Renewal. Prior to joining CLG, Joe's previous position was as Executive Director for Regeneration at Lewisham Council. He has extensive experience of grant making and urban renewal from his work as Assistant Secretary to the Cadbury Trust, as leader of the government's Inner City Task Force, and as Chief Executive of one of the Pathfinder City Challenge urban regeneration companies. Joe spent 7 years as a local government chief officer with responsibility for housing and planning, transport, environment, and economic development. He's served on the Joseph Rowntree Foundation's advisory panel on area regeneration and on the boards of Lewisham College, Middlesex University, and South London Training and Enterprise Council. He currently serves as a non-executive director for the Department for Transport and as chairman of IMTA, the International Urban Development Association. Joe, there's your introduction. I'm very delighted to welcome you to the podium. Joe Montgomery.
Thanks, Kieran. You took up half the introduction, half the presentation time with the introduction. It's mostly untrue, I have to say. Well, look, is anybody here from Manchester? I can hardly see, but is anybody here from Manchester?
Few hands.
Good, because we're going to talk about you. Really, the title of this small session was arrived at as a provocation to Sir Michael Bichat, sitting at the centre there. As a Manchester United fan, you know, the question we sort of had in our minds was, is Manchester punching its weight as the nation's second city? Because when you compare it to Barcelona, Manchester doesn't have anything like the same sorts of powers. The mayor for Barcelona was able to secure the Olympics for his city, rather than us securing the Olympics for the capital city here. The mayor for Barcelona can raise taxes without reference to the centre. The mayor for Barcelona is responsible for higher and further education, has a whole host of powers that helps to make Barcelona feel like a strong, independent city that can shape its own destiny to a much greater degree than Manchester can. So our question really is, what can second cities, what can other big cities, what can local towns and cities up and down the country, what can they do to shape their own destiny in a country that's really quite small, but where so much decision-making, so much policy-making is centralized? But just to get into this, let's talk about the prevailing trends. And everybody's concerned just now about the global downturn, the fact that the whole world is going through this problem of financing and banking liquidity. But actually, it's not quite true, is it? Because although you see so many red arrows pointing down, which indicates a reduction in the size of the GDP or an increase in the size of unemployment, there are some green arrows pointing up. So there's a global recession, yes, but it affects different places differentially. And in a way, that's part of the theme here. Because if you listened to the Speaker of the United States, or the old one, the very famous white-haired one, Tip O'Neill, he used to remind us that all politics is local. So that there are these great big global trends: global competitiveness, crisis in public finances, climate change, and an aging population. But each of these big global trends affects different places differently. But in a country that's essentially quite small, we have much of the budget setting and the direction of financial policy set at the center with the budget. You know that we'll be taking efficiency savings of £15 billion out of the system, and the books won't be balanced for some long time. But actually, in the codicils to the budget was a paper that Sir Michael Bichat at the centre there has taken responsibility for, the Operational Efficiency Programme, which invites us to think much more locally about how specific places can find efficiencies, how they can drive up public services, and rather than having a top-down, centrally driven set of financial decision-making taking hold in that place, can we get a partnership of much more local institutions helping to work out how to drive up the quality of public services whilst they reduce the cost of it? And again, this theme is echoed in Building Britain's Future, the document that you'll all have read. I can see that look in your eye. You've all read it closely because you've read within it these lines about local communities having real power over local services and building in a much broader and deeper sense of local democracy and accountability. And I think it's fair to say that localism is the fashion that's been embraced by all the major parties. So you'll find that the Tory party in its recent missives has been talking about the same sorts of things. So localism is the flavour of the month, but when it comes to mayors and local leadership, well, the Marmite test applies. You either love them or you hate them. So you've got a mayor of Doncaster here who stirred up local controversy, got himself into some difficulty, I think it's fair to say, whereas the mayor of Middlesbrough, who originally campaigned as a Middlesbrough Football Club mascot in a monkey suit, has been re-elected with a huge majority. So you either love them or you hate them, but they are a device that is supposed to engender and to build up much greater sense of local interest in local issues and local politics. But again, if you are a believer in the Barcelona model, you'll say that as we rethink our systems of governance and decision-making, strong local institutions are a key to all of these features here: healthy and vibrant civil society, effective public services, and a vibrant local economy. And when your local institutions don't work, you get Stoke, you get Burnley of 2001, you get all kinds of difficulties in your local civic life and quality of life. But anyway, as we get into this debate about localism and how local institutions drive decision-making and how good they are, I think it's fair to say that if you interview people at the local level, they're happier with where they live, they're less worried about crime, they feel better about a whole host of public services, but they're not very satisfied with their local authorities. They think much more poorly of them than they used to, even a couple of years ago. So actually, there's no overwhelming case that residents, that citizens have fully bought into the idea that local government is the solution to all their problems. In fact, they're pushing back quite a lot. And as we start to think about the differences that apply in different places, there's this risk, of course, that we get into postcode lotteries. Why is it that in some towns and cities you have a vibrant, extensive post office network, and in other places you can't find a post office for love nor money? Why is it that you have to pay to get your bin emptied in some places, and it's emptied on a fortnightly cycle, and in other places it's free and you get your bin emptied every week? So the more you get into localism and devolved local power, the more risk there is that you'll get really quite different local services. And in all of this, there's the government regional office network. It is there, we are there, to try and make sure that we present a single voice for government, that government looks joined up, that we have a convincing story rather than 11 separate departments marauding around Birmingham or wherever it is, telling a different story about what the genuine local priorities are. I'm rather proud of the government regional offices. Look at handsome and powerful they look there. And that's just the Government Office for London team as they cleared out some of the rubbish from the Thames. We do have women working in Government Office for London, by the way, as well. But actually, the regional offices are really very, very good at helping government to make sure that it responds intelligently, quickly, and in a coordinated way to crises and emergencies. It's very, very good at taking underperforming local institutions to task and driving up their performance. Regional officers have done a sterling job in supporting regional ministers and making sure that these new regional select committees go well. And we've helped to advance Whitehall's policy agenda in each of the regions. And they look after these folk, the regional ministers. But I suppose the question that I'd like to provoke you with, and that I hope you'll in turn provoke the panel with, is in a country this small, is it really right to have decision-making, policy-making, efficiency decisions taken at the centre, or ought these decisions to be much more highly devolved? Can we trust places to take these decisions intelligently and sensibly? Wasn't that long ago that Whitehall was at war with town halls, capped them routinely and prevented them from doing things, and actually took powers off them and created new quangos through which to deliver a lot of these services. So is there a case constitutionally for a different settlement between the centre and the local? How powerful ought the regional tier to be? Can we trust local government and local institutions to drive up public services and to satisfy citizens when local citizens appear to be saying, actually, we're not quite so in love with local government as we used to be? In a country this small, should we be making sure that the mayor of Manchester has the same sorts of powers available to him or to her as the mayor of Barcelona? And would that make any difference to the football results? I'll close there and leave you to ask questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to just introduce you to the rest of the panel who will be joining this debate. From left to right, I'm going to introduce you to Professor Michael Clarke. He's the Non-Executive Director from the Government Office West Midlands Strategy Board. Michael was appointed Vice Principal at the University of Birmingham in January 2003. He joined the university 10 years ago, having spent 18 years outside the academic world, latterly as Chief Executive of the Local Government Management Board, the National Employers' Organisation for Local Government. For the last 5 years, he's had responsibility for the university's external relations, including those with business. He's a non-executive director of the Birmingham Research Park and the Malvern Hills Science Park, and the Central Technology Belt. He chairs the Worcestershire Strategic Partnership and is a member of the Birmingham Strategic Partnership and the West Midlands Regional Assembly. He is also a member of the General Synod of the Church of England and a lay canon and member of the chapter of Worcester Cathedral. So very welcome to you, Professor Michael Clarke. We'll speed these up. In the middle is Sir Michael Bichard, the Executive Director from the Institute of Government. I will say no more by way of introduction, if that's okay. You're very welcome, Sir Michael. And finally, on the right-hand side is Trudy Elliott, the Regional Director from the Government Office for the West Midlands. I said I was going to invite the panel to give me their first thoughts on the back of what Joe has just said. So can I ask you, Professor Michael Clarke, tell us what your thoughts are.
Just two quick comments. Beware apparently simple comparisons. Wherever I have been in the world, Manchester United has been well known, not just in general, but detail. Not a bad brand, actually. So let's put Barcelona to shame. Secondly, the mayor of Barcelona may be a really interesting figure, but if you ask me to tell you which local authority in the United Kingdom was probably strongest in its leadership, officer and member, it would be Manchester City Council. Sir Richard Leese, as leader of the City Council, has been incredibly influential in developing that city, working closely with his chief executive. So let's get caught up in some oversimple comparisons.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Michael Bichard.
Well, he's stolen one of my lines. I mean, obviously, I regard the title as a gratuitous and offensive title. And I would just remind Joe that Gus O'Donnell is also a passionate Red, and this may be a career-limiting decision on your part. But we talk about tax, we talk about powers. Manchester has been a hugely successful local authority city, and it's successful because it has a very clear vision about what it wants to do and outstanding leadership in Richard Lees and Howard Bernstein. And I think often, in all walks of life, we always complain about the fact we haven't got enough power. Often we've got enough power, we just don't use it. And Manchester actually is a very good example of how it's been used. And what have they done? They've capitalised, and I will plagiarise Gus, pride, passion and place. That's what Manchester has got. And they've added a degree of innovation to that. Put all of that in a pot and you end up with something which is pretty impressive. And they've got a pretty good football team, but only one.
Very good, thank you. We're finding what that noise is and see if we can stop that. Trudy.
Well, I didn't like the title because I'm an Arsenal supporter, and I think, you know,
Can you hear,
London
Trudy?
let Manchester United get there. But anyway, I think we need to be clear it's not a simple either or in terms of stronger localities, weaker centre. For me, it's about what is the appropriate level to make decisions about things that make a difference to individual lives, and where can you get the best synergies and join up. And sometimes that's at local level, sometimes it's at sub-regional level, sometimes it's regional, sometimes it's national, and sometimes it's, you know, a wider unit than that. And I think we need to focus on that a bit. I suppose last night I was at a dinner with the CBI, and a big focus of their conversation, actually, and Richard Lambert was speaking, was about public services. And it's interesting, you know, it's the first time I've been to a CBI by dinner when they're talking about public services, the cost of public services, efficiencies in public services. So there's a big searchlight on us, I think, at the moment from other parts of the world, the wider world, and we need to bear that in mind when we have these conversations.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you, Trudy. Kate, questions for me. Let's get started. Who fancies kicking us off? It's always the worst part of the day. Great, hand at the back, I can see. Let me come over there with the microphone. There you go. If you could say who you are, that'd be great.
Lisa from 11 Million. I was wanting to ask the panel if there's any connection between where decisions are made and whether or not they work.
Okay, where decisions are made and whether or not they actually work. Michael Bichard, how about we start there?
It's where they're made, it's who you involve when you make them. And I certainly think there's a connection between you know, the effectiveness of decisions then. If you don't involve the people on the front line, you know, whether you're in a government department and you're talking about staff or whether you're talking about involving clients, if you don't involve the people on the front line, the chances are the decision ain't going to work very well. I mean, I used to run the benefits agency. Someone reminded me earlier today. I mean, fantastically clever policy, but you try delivering it.
Okay, very good. Trudy, do you have a view on that?
No, I agree with that. I agree with that comment. But I think we have to get cleverer about the feedback loop, because it's not just about the policy and involving people in making the policy. It's feeding back how it pans out and what you learn, and being and adapting it as you go. And I think we could do a lot more in terms of feedback loops.
Okay, so involving people in feedback. Do you want to come in on that point?
My name's Gillian Maiden. I'm, as well as being a civil servant, I'm also a parish councillor in a small village in Derbyshire. But yes, we are involved as a parish council in some of the local decisions that we haven't got the money to pay for. But we generally feel that we're not listened to, and we don't get that feedback as to why. So I think that's a good point that you've made there. Have you any comments about that feedback loop?
So how do you make that feedback loop happen then, I guess, and you don't always feel like you're getting listened to at the parish council level? Does anyone else want to come in on this same point? Gentleman at the back. There you go.
Does central government think that local communities can have more power?
Local communities can have more power. Can you say more about that? What do you mean?
Is there bad implications, bad implications, good implications, things like that?
Sorry, I didn't hear the last bit. About what?
It's quite difficult to hear.
Should the central government give local communities more power? More.
Okay. Can I?
The question you asked us.
First go at that one. When I first joined the civil service, I had a full afro and a beard. all the hair fell out because of a policy experiment that involved devolving very large chunks of money to lay people in local communities. The New Deal for Communities programme had £2 billion of money over a fairly lengthy period, but most of the money was devolved into the hands of very localised resident-led boards. And it's immensely stressful because of all of the things that could go wrong. And, you know, there is this tension in the system that it's us that have to account to the Public Accounts Committee, but if all the decisions are so devolved and you've got no control, then you really do feel powerless in the run-up to the PAC. However, happily, most of the decisions taken by most of those local partnerships were good ones and sound ones, and I would contend that only a few of them failed. So I'd say it was a good thing to think about devolving right down to local levels, but with the right kind of support, training, and accountabilities to make sure that money didn't go missing.
Okay. Michael Clark?
Just a couple of things to come back to the parish councils for a moment. There's an implicit assumption in this session that the tension is between centralism, London, and localism, regional and local government. I'm a localist, but I know from observation and experience that many local authorities are equally bad at resolving the tension and like to hold things to themselves. And I meet a lot of parish councillors who are deeply frustrated with what they're trying to do. In my county, and I guess it's common across the country, the parish planning movement, where parishes are setting out to articulate their needs and enter into dialogue with district and county councils and other public agencies, are providing a very important grassroots, as it were, input into the shaping of policy. But we shouldn't ignore the fact that most organisations tend to have within them forces which are about centralism. And it has to be a conscious act to turn around and look outwards and involve from the outside in.
Okay, thank you. I've got a point. Is it a point on this same subject or a new point? Come in now then, great. We're going there.
Stuart McDonnell. If you compare Manchester and Barcelona, you're comparing an English city with a European city coming from a very different tradition. But if you look at the powers of Barcelona, they're quite dramatic compared to the powers that are available to an English city. For example, the city authorities in Barcelona have special laws made just about them, which enable them to veto central government decisions that affect Barcelona in some circumstances. There are other examples across Europe of devolution and local decision-making existing in a different kind of tension with central government decision-making. And as a non-English person, I sometimes wonder if it might be an advantage to open up our thinking, perhaps, to look at some of these other alternatives, because there are other models out there than the ones that we've traditionally worked with in England. Do the panel have any views about that?
Okay, great. So if I go to Michael Bichard first on that point.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that, and one of the things we're trying to do at the new Institute for Government is indeed to try and bring international experience more to the centre of our thinking in the UK. And we've been doing that recently, you might have noticed, looking at how other governments are dealing with recession and looking particularly at the moment at the Canadian experience. I don't think we do anything like enough of that. In direct answer to your question, of course, what you find is that we have a particularly centralised system. And that system became even more centralised post-1980 because of the despair that central government had about some of the authorities and what they were doing. Actually, I was Chief Executive at Brent at the time, so I was on the wrong side at that particular moment. But I could understand the frustration. Michael said he's a localist. At heart, I'm a localist too, and I think we could certainly devolve more power to local agencies. I think what we've also done, though, over the last 40 years is create an unbelievably complicated set of local delivery mechanisms. Small, niche providers, specialist providers, and it's very, very difficult for them to provide a joined-up, seamless service to the client. And so I think we've got to address that. But we're not going to be able to do all of that in the next 2 years. These things take quite a long time. And the reason that I've been promoting this Total Place initiative is we've got to find something to do in the next 2 to 5 years, which is going to address the problems that clients experience, but also the problems that we're now experiencing financially. Long answer to your question, yes, I agree with you, more power, more devolution, but properly managed.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you. I'm going to go straight to a question here. Then we've got one at the front and one at the back. Sir.
Okay, my name's Mike Roberts. Unlike our parish councillor, I'm also a local authority councillor for 33 years, so in a disadvantaged area in the southeast. I won't say where, but we're at the home of the British Army. You can work that one out for yourself. Just a couple of correction points to the football teams that the panel support or know about at the top. Of course, Joe, you were thinking of Hartlepool and not Middlesbrough.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for those who are Manchester United fans, of course, there's only one team in Manchester, and that's Manchester City, because Manchester United are in Trafford.
Very good.
Which is why they're called Old Trafford. The biggest issue that we in local government face is, in fact, ever since I've been in a council since 1976 and still continue at both levels, is the fact that there's been more and more centralisation. In fact, governments have taught localisation and in fact have done completely the opposite. As you mentioned, all the delivery mechanisms have been much more geared to being central, in spite of the fact that we've had a regional structure. And in fact, don't forget, we actually put in the German Länder structure in about 1948, because that was the way, in fact, of stopping some of the tensions which had gone on in Germany prior to the Second World War. We put it in here half-heartedly and then withdrew it. So I believe that if you're looking at real power away and real localism, because I'm a local community councillor, I've done over 800 cases this year alone. So it gives you an idea of just how much I am on the doorstep and doing things. But the only way you can actually take an expression of the local community is to make it, yes, local, but the decision-making has to be done in a structured form where you do get the power away from Westminster and Whitehall, which, in fact, neither government have done. They've taken it in. You also have to have the scrutiny at the regional level as well, which we've just got rid of. And we have to give powers back to local government on whatever it's on a local government base or, in my case, area, a sub-regional base, so we can actually seek to deliver it across boundaries.
Okay, thank you very much. Trudy, can I ask you to comment on that?
Well, I presume you're referring to regional assemblies in terms of scrutiny.
Real regional assemblies.
I think one of the initiatives that could be interesting, it could have been more interesting if all political parties had engaged, is what's going to come out of regional select committees, because we've opened the sort of genie out of the bottle, and they are, I think we thought they might be very focused on the performance of organisations in regions, but what we're discovering is what they're very interested in is how national policy is playing out in regions and localities. So I think for me, that's going to be an interesting feedback loop, going back to my point about, so what does this mean where we're making national responses and how they then pan out in terms of localities and regions.
Okay, thanks, Judy. Michael Clark, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, back to the start of your observations, we need to remember that and Michael hinted at this, 20, 25 years, the centre has been battering local government and constraining it. Now, there have been some moves in the other direction over the last few years, good, but we need to remember that quite significant damage has been done to local government in terms of both elected members and officers. That's going to take some time to change. But at the heart of the change needs to be a change of culture. Sorry to those of you living and working in the Whitehall village, but you are part of a deeply metropolitan centralist culture, which is inimical to real localism. There needs to be a change of culture at the local level if the local level is going to grasp at the opportunities that the localist agenda presents to them. Michael said these kind of changes can't take place overnight. Changing culture is a reminder that they certainly can't take place overnight. They're going to need working at carefully, and they need to start with some serious questions about what is best done at what level. A question we're actually not very good at asking in this country.
Okay. Joe, can I ask you to comment on so Whitehall's change of culture required here and locally, We've got to start by asking what needs to be done, what should be decisions locally.
As somebody who spent as much of their career working locally on local service delivery, I was most excited by that period of New Labour, when there was a model of policy making that brought academics, local practitioners and lay people from real communities into the centre to help in the policy formulation process. Actually, I thought you got real innovation there. I thought you got the kind of buy-in that Michael was talking about, because some of the people who'd have to deliver the policy and some of the people who would be affected by the policy were involved in its shaping. So I'm very, very keen to return to a kind of more broadly based way of formulating policy, so that those who have to deliver it and those who are going to have to live with it have a chance to shape it more profoundly at the beginning, rather than making sense of it in a retrofitted sort of way.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to go to this gentleman here. Are you going to take us to a different subject?
Afraid not.
Fair enough. No, that's fine.
Richard Hanford from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And I just thought there's rather an overemphasis on the all-powerful mayor figures. I mean, for instance, I was going to make the correction about Hartlepool. Obviously, the mascot in the monkey suit hasn't really helped to put Hartlepool on the map, because it's mistaken for Middlesbrough. But, I mean, more seriously, I'd like to hear more about schemes like participatory budgeting and the community empowerment. And I think perhaps, I wonder if you think that's where the future lies, more than just investing so much publicity and power in single figures.
Okay, so community empowerment, participatory budgeting, is that the future? I don't know who's best to start that one off.
You can treat mayors as a bit of a peripheral issue. On the other hand, it's always seemed to me that they do produce accountability in a very visible form. And if you're concerned that one of the things that we've lost in this country is an interest locally in politics and government, then actually maybe that is more part of the answer than we give credit for. And maybe what we're going through at the moment, there's some fairly difficult transitions. There are some successes, there are some failures. But, you know, I certainly haven't lost hope that that may be part of the solution. The main part of your question, I'm doing a session later, it's not marketing this, but for the Design Council, and trying to kind of talk about how you can use design to improve public services. And one of the things I will be saying is that what we've done, I think over 20, 30, 40 years, as long as Michael Clarke and I have been around, is to sometimes give the impression that the public clients are empowered, that they're consulted, that they're involved, that we have participation. What we've been quite skillful at avoiding is giving clients some power to shape and reshape services. And I think that's really where we've now got to go. I think the future is about better services at less cost. It's about getting rid of some of the overheads that our strange governmental system produces. It's certainly about innovation. And it's about building things around the client and giving them real power. The debate is, how do you actually do that? But that has to be the future.
Okay, Professor Clarke, I can see you want to come in on that.
Just a quick comment on the participatory budgeting and empowerment issues. They're not going to be simple sole palliatives, but they've got to be part of the mix. Joe mentioned Stoke-on-Trent. I've been doing some work for the government in Stoke-on-Trent over this last 18 months, and it's probably the nearest we have in the United Kingdom to a failed state, in the sense that there's almost complete disengagement of ordinary citizens from the institutions of politics in their broadest sense. Now, that's beginning to change, I think, but it's a reminder, if you want a reminder, of what can happen to communities without deep and proper engagement by citizens. If you begin to see the breakdown of civil society, then most of the agenda we're talking about this afternoon simply becomes unattainable.
Okay. Thank you. I've got 4 questions ready to go, I think, or points to be made. Next is yours.
Katie Hewitt, Communities and Local Government. My question is kind of related to your point. We talk about Richard Lee's in my Kenbrook. What is the future for the devolution agenda for those local authorities that don't have that strong leadership, and how are we going to build their capacity to get them to that stage?
Okay, so devolution is all very well where there's strong leadership already, but how do you make that work for authorities without that? Joe.
Gee, thanks. Well, actually, I'm still thinking about some of the points made by parish council colleagues and people who've served as parish councillors, because there's a sort of prejudice within our department that unitary local authorities are the right model and everything else is somehow a subspecies and ought to be gotten out of the way. And we think that whilst we are talking about the encouragement of localism and getting local folk involved in decision making, I think we are quite confused about the messages we send out. I think we can foster better leadership if we give more powers to some of these places, because it's been interesting to see that as we've stripped more and more powers for local further and higher and further education, skills training, a lot of the health functions, as we've stripped those powers and responsibilities away from local government, so the calibre of people who've presented themselves as potential council leaders or mayors has gone down. So I sort of think that if you really want strong leadership, you have to give the people who are going to put themselves forward something meaningful to be in charge of and some real levers to pull. Because if you give them all the responsibility, but you keep, if you give them all the answerability, but you keep all of the power at the centre, I don't see that it can ever work.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Trudy?
For me, it's about how do we attract some of the people who are very active in localities, in regions, into local politics. Because as I go around the region, you know, I meet lots of really feisty women doing lots of things in their localities, running this, that and the other, but none of them are on local councils. You know, the councils in our region, and, you know, I don't think the West Midlands is unrepresentative, are universally populated by, in the main, white blokes over 50, you know, and I love them, I'm married to
like
one.
Michael and me.
You know, well, you know, but until we start getting them more representative of the communities they serve, and until, I think it goes back to Joe's point, until people see that the council is the solution to the problem, and therefore want to be part of the council to solve the challenges of their community, we're not going to make the shift. Going back to the question before last, I think there's a bit of a moment really for local authorities, parish councils, well, all of us, and it's about being brave, because actually we now know we can't afford the status quo, so carrying on as we are is not an option. So really it is a moment to seize the moment and say, well, what about doing it this way? What about doing it differently? And I think the clever local authorities and their partners will use the Total Place initiative to really try and drive some change in how things get delivered to individuals and communities.
But I'm not sure that everyone wants to be involved in the local democratic process or politics in particular. I think what they do want is to have some way of influencing and shaping the services that matter to them. And I think there are, I mean, in order for them to be able to do that, you've got to devolve enough power for those decisions to be taken locally, I agree. But I think there are other routes, other than the kind of political process, to get people more involved. A friend who's currently working in Sheffield looking at some disadvantaged families there and the various agencies that are working with them, how well those agencies relate to each other. Actually, Charlie Ledbetter's doing something fairly similar in Swindon at the moment. And one of the things that comes out of that is that these families actually have got some fairly clear ideas about how they want the services structured and delivered. They just don't have the way, the framework within which they can bring that to the table. What's also very clear is that it's not a problem of money. I mean, some of these families are receiving support which is costing something like £250,000 a year. It's just that it's coming from so many different directions which aren't in any way joined up. So we talk about, well, it's going to be tough out there, there's not going to be much money around. Well, there's a lot of money out there, we're just not necessarily using it very well, because the people right at the receiving end are not getting a chance to shape what we're doing.
Thank you.
I agree with all of that, actually, but during my time in local government, one of the things that shocked me was that there were more members at Blockbuster Video than in the local Labour Party for the whole borough. In some of the wards, you could have put a donkey up and he would have got elected at that time. And the more we, sorry, I didn't mean to be crass, but the more we strip out real power, real responsibility, and the ability to fundamentally change things, the more we strip that out from local government, the less attractive it's going to be for really able people. But something Trudy said sparked a thought with me. It is possible to create a sort of ladder of involvement that people can grow through. In these New Deal for Communities partnerships that I mentioned earlier, some people got the taste and the skill set for making decisions about allocating scarce resources when there are competing pressures. Some people went on to serve on PCT boards. Some people went on to become councillors. And I think creating that kind of ladder of opportunity for people and getting them involved in fairly low-risk ways at the beginning so that they can grow into fuller responsibilities may be something we want to invest a bit more in.
I agree with that.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got a question here.
Sorry, Kathy Scott from the Government Office. There's often a difference or a gap between what the public expect and what we actually deliver. So firstly, why is there that gap? And secondly, how can we fix it, given that we are operating at a time where we have less in the way of resource?
The expectations versus delivery question. Who wants to kick us off with that?
Well, very simply. I mean, in a way, it's repeating some of the things we've already said. I mean, it's a simple question with quite a complex hinterland. But if people are disconnected from the services they're receiving, then almost certainly expectation and delivery are going to be different. If you follow the kind of route that Michael was describing just now, about involving people in the shaping of services, both clients and those delivering at the sharp end, the chances are you'll get a much better match between service delivered and expectation of it.
Okay, Joe?
Oh, well, one of my little campaigns when I first came into Whitehall was, this amazement that some of our public service offerings sort of started at 9:30 and shut up shop at 4:30, when most people who are working wanted to be able to get hold of those services sometime after 4:30 p.m., possibly electronically up to 11 o'clock and up to midnight and beyond. Saturday opening was a thing we pioneered in local government for libraries. There's a whole thing about people who are in jobs being time poor, but public services being operated pretty much on the 1970s model that assumed everybody had the chance to do this during normal, to use services during normal working hours. And this idea that we need to completely rethink the way we deliver services according to demand patterns that residents might have, I think that's something we've yet to fully embrace. I think we're better at it, but still a lot to do on that.
I think Joe's right when he says we haven't yet embraced it. There's a danger, because we've talked about this for so long, that we actually believe it's all changed. I mean, the reality is that too many of the decisions that are taken are still taken for the convenience of the providers in every one of our services, rather than for the convenience of clients, customers, citizens, patients. And we've still got a long way to go there. And it is about giving those people more power to influence the way in which we do provide, we do deliver, and we shape services.
I still cannot see my GP after 6 o'clock in the evening or the weekends.
As
it happens, I've now retired. Fine. But what a system. Who designed that, for heaven's sake?
Okay, very good. I've got a question at the back over here, sir.
One of the things that Joe touched on at the start was that in devolving power out of Whitehall into regions, that maybe some areas will excel while others will get left behind. And what's the danger, in the panel's opinion, of doing that? And also, as some regions excel and people perhaps begin to feel more loyalty and pride towards their own local area, do we lose some national identity along the way as a country as part of that? and what are the dangers of that.
Okay, very good. So I won't even try and repeat it again. So Michael Bichard, start us off on that, and then I'll go to Joe.
Well, I think that when I know I'm very old now, but when I started in local authority, we used to celebrate diversity. That kind of got, I think, seriously damaged in the 80s. But you can't have it both ways. If you're going to devolve, then there is going to be a sense in which there's going to be more diversity. We've got to a stage in this country where we expect complete uniformity, and that's, I think, partly media dominated. So I think moving in the direction I think we're probably all saying we need to move may well mean that some move quicker than others, that there is some competition in the system. I think people, areas, regions, cities, do respond to competition. Just look what's happened across the country. I mean, look at Manchester, look at Birmingham, look at Gateshead and Newcastle. I mean, it didn't all happen at once. I mean, these cities are basically saying at some point or other, we've got to catch up with what's going on over there. Look at Leeds. I think that's healthy competition. I think that's what we need. And I don't think it means that we lose the sense of national identity at all. I think that is actually very, very strong.
Okay, thank you. Joe, before I come to you, I know Professor Michael Clark has to leave in 1 minute. So do you want to come in on this point before you have to dash?
Well, can I just take us back, actually, to something Joe said in his introductory remarks. He talked about the risk of different levels of provision in different places. That seems to me to be an indicator of a healthy society. We are very, very tentative about allowing localities to make differences. I don't believe...
It's not true in the States, is it?
No, absolutely not. And indeed, many European countries too. And I don't believe that that diversity undermines national identity.
Couldn't disagree more.
Very good.
That's all right if you don't live in one of those places that suffers from the inverse care law, where you've got a very large concentration of the poorest people who are most reliant on high-quality public services but are least likely to receive them. There are neighbourhoods and there are places in this country where the schools are crap, where crime is high and out of control still, where health and social care doesn't work terribly well, where the housing is of the very poorest quality, and they're not likely to catch up with the rest of us anytime soon. So I'm all for allowing a degree of postcode lottery. We're not in Siberia, but as long as it's conditioned by some sort of minimum standard that every place should be required to meet, because I'm tired of going to places where I don't recognize that this neighborhood is part of this country. I'm going to Jaywick next week. I don't know if anybody knows that place. It's where every single public service is so far adrift of the national average that it's a disgrace, but nobody's bothered. So that kind of postcode lottery, I'm less tolerant of.
Okay, thank you. I know you've got to leave, Professor Clark, so do you want to say something before you go?
No, I'll leave it to others.
I don't think we were saying that.
Very good. Well, thank you. If I can just thank Professor Clark before he just leaves. So thank you very much to you. We will continue our debate for another 10 minutes. So thank you very much. We've got another 10 minutes with the panel. I think I've got a question at the front. Can I take your question now? Then I'm going to there. Then I'm coming to you. And I've got a hand at the back. Your question first.
Is this working?
It should be.
Will progress on devolution save the Treasury money within the next 10 years?
Okay. Will it save money? Mr. Bichard, I believe.
Will they save money?
Will the progress on devolution save the Treasury money?
Well, I mean, I don't want to keep coming back to toll place, but the idea of this was to look at how we can provide two things. One's better services, but the other is at less cost. And I think the answer to your question is yes, because I think if you put more power at the front line, if you allow people nearer the front line to take decisions about how services are structured and provided, then there are savings to be made out there. There are savings in terms of overheads and transaction costs, because we do have this very expensive system. But there are also changes by redesigning the way in which we shape policy. I went to Kent on Friday to look at some of the work they're doing down there with their Gateway project, which is a single access point to most of their public services, not actually yet DWP, which is interesting. And they produced, Peter Gilroy, the chief executive down there, produced me a map of all the offices of public agencies in Kent. where they were, and it's a national scandal. I mean, there are vast numbers of public offices, cheek by jowl, and why are they there? They're not there for the convenience of the public and the clients. They're there because each of these public sector agencies wants to have its own office, its own identity, and they will not, many of them, or they haven't until now, joined up and gone into one public office. That's just one small example of how, if you take more control and power locally, you can do what is sensible for local citizens. And what citizens want, I was in Tunbridge Wells, is one office that's got gateway above it, which they know is a place they can go to get access to all of the public services except DWP.
One of the interesting things about efficiencies is the sort of what I call the vertical horizontal axis. A lot of the attempts at driving out inefficiencies in the civil service has been down this side of the food chain, and that often rubs up against and competes against attempts to make efficiencies by joining up in places and in regions. And we're doing a piece of work within the government office network, working with our partners in regions, looking at whether we can be more efficient in terms of how we use the staff who live in one place, you know, and have about the economic footprint of the civil service, about the estates, but often attempts to do it in a region, you know, rub up against national efficiency drives in departments, you know, centralisation of services. Often places have different property, not because they don't want to share, but because in the short term it's cheaper to take on a new separate property than cuddle up with an existing civil service outlet, even though that would reduce the global bill. And we've got to get cleverer at that. And we're doing some work around that in regions because we tried it one way, and you know, the recent report says that, you know, in the years of plenty, public sector has got 3% less efficient against the private sector being 12% more efficient. Now, whether that's a true statistic, but that was, you know, that's what the CBI are saying on the back of last week's report. So we've tried it one way, we've got to try it another way.
Okay. Thanks, Trudy. I've got a question here, then I've got one and another one.
Hi, my name's Mike Simmons. I work currently in the Marine and Fisheries Agency. I used to work in government office, and prior to that I was in the Whitehall Village. Very interesting points that Trudy's just made about trying to join things up, which is one of the roles of government office, but sometimes not really known. And also the point was made about all the agencies in Kent. My agency that I work in has agencies all over the country, and they don't join up. And I just wonder, do you think the Go network is doing enough to sell itself not just to the wider public network, the wider public, but also into the Whitehall departments, the Whitehall villages, because they are the ones who fund the Goes. And where I'm working in fisheries, they don't put any money into the government office network, but actually the work we need to do actually needs government office involvement. So I'm just wondering, do you think you're doing enough to actually get Whitehall Village to put more in to help the Go network?
Okay. Joe first.
Thank you. Well, when the Go network was invented, not that many years ago, there were 3 departments that participated in it and sponsored the network and funded its activities. There are now 12, including DEFRA and DEC. Now, would we like more of government to be brought in? Well, surely. Would we like to get more of the departmental field teams woven into the fabric of the Go in the way that Trudy's just described? Certainly, yes. But is the Go network playing into Whitehall and the policy-making process in Whitehall enough? I'd say no, but far more powerfully than was ever the case before. There are various regional office colleagues in the room, Trudy included, that now have a brief for handling and influencing particular departments on behalf of the whole network. So we're getting to grips with that test. Ask us in a year or maybe, yeah, ask us in a year, we'd have a far better answer. But actually, I think we're starting to get to grips with that properly now.
Okay. Trudy.
I mean, one of the common complaints we get when we go out to meet local authority colleagues is the plethora of other field forces that are knocking on their door and trying to come in, and they would prefer us to have you know, more single conversations, to use the eight new Homes and Communities Agency's approach, than, you know, a succession of people trotting in to see them about one small aspect of one part of a department's policy. I think we're doing much more than we have done. I think we need to do much more. And again, I think there's a bit of a moment, because, you know, the economic imperative, apart from everything else, and we are spending a lot of our time, you know, joining up in regions that which is not as joined up as it should be nationally.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got another question here from the gentleman just right there.
Anthony Green from CLG. I've just got a question for the panel, and this has been touched on briefly before. If you give more powers to local authority, does the panel think that makes it more difficult to tackle national problems efficiently and effectively? In particular, looking at maybe climate change and planning permission for wind farms and that kind of thing.
Okay, so is it harder, if you give more power to local authorities, is it more difficult to challenge the national problems? Michael?
Well, everything we've said is that you've got to get the balance right. I don't think it necessarily is, and I think if you look at something like climate change is one of those issues which you need to have national policies for, but you also need to encourage, facilitate changes of behaviour at a local level. It's also one of those many issues which, the big issues at the moment, nearly all seem to range across government departments, and I think you actually only understand that better if you are addressing them locally as well as nationally, because I think that's where you can actually get better, more seamless policies. You can get that locally, it seems, more easily than you can nationally. So I think you need approaches at both ends, but let's not convince ourselves, let's not say to ourselves, just because climate change is a global problem, it's only susceptible to national solutions. You know, this is an issue, you know, for local solutions as well, and the same for growth of chronic disease, the growth of an aging population. All of these things need national approaches, but they also need local approaches.
Okay. I guess the point of my little talk at the beginning was all of these global themes and these national policy goals present themselves as different challenges according to where in the country you are. So an environmental challenge in one part of the country might be about coastal erosion. There may be profoundly rural challenges somewhere else. In deeply urban settings, it might be about air quality. You know, the challenge is different according to where you are. And one of the bits of local government that I miss most of all was a very localized response to the climate change and environmental challenge called Local Agenda 21, which sought to build, you know, local community-based coalitions to tackle some of these very big national problems, but in a way that was sensitized to the local presentation of that problem. So I think it really does need government to set the national target, the frameworks, the incentives, and so on. But a lot of the action will inevitably take place at local level.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. We're going to stop the questions there. I've got some answers to give everybody in just a second, but I want to invite the panel just in a few words each by way of kind of wrap up anything you want to say towards, just to wrap us up in the final kind of things. You've heard lots of comments. I've got a few of the bits of feedback. So it's all about feedback loops.
Sorry, can I give my one answer then to all of these people who corrected me on the football? Well, look, you see, in truth, I am a Millwall fan. Our motto is, no one likes us, we don't care. So whether it was Hartlepool or Middlesbrough is secondary. We were right anyway. Thank you very much, Keith.
Very good. That's a good final word, isn't it? But some of the key things that I've picked up, just by way of summary, really, it's about the feedback loops. It doesn't matter where you make the decision, and what matters is who is involved in the decision. And I love the point you made, Joe, about the kind of the less power you give to the front line, actually, the less quality you'll see in the leadership. So actually, we need to give a bit more out there and see what happens a little bit. And the final point, I think, is your suggestion that maybe politicians need to lend videos in blockbuster style and get some members that way. But panel, I'd like to ask you just to say if there's anything you want to say by way of summary. Michael? Nope. Joe? Trudy?
I'd like to extend an invitation, actually, to any colleagues, any civil service colleagues here who are Whitehall-based and who would like, you know, a taste of either a locality or a region. because we would, in the Government Office Network, be happy to put you in touch with our local authority colleagues, have you work shadow us in Government Office, because I do think, actually, the closer you get to delivery, the more it will inform your daily work. So can I extend that offer to you?
Okay, very good. Great invitation. Thank you. Right, we're going to run through the answers to the questions for those of you that want to know them before we go. So, oh, hello, there we go. We asked you about that one. The answer, any guesses? Anyone want to shout out? There you go, Northwest, that's them. The team's in the Premiership. The trick here is that it doesn't matter if you got this right or not. We are going to put you in the draw anyway, so you might win it. That was the question 2. Is it true or false that the Angel of the North? Any guesses? It's true. Look at that, 178 feet. Should be working in new metrics there, 54 metres versus 46. Question 3 there, the person was born in York. Who was that? Any guesses? Shout them out. Robinson Crusoe, of course. How many colleges make up Cambridge University? I'm not hearing anything. 31. There we go. I'm seeing some celebrations in the middle there. That's looking good. Which cathedral? This tough one. I thought this was ridiculously difficult, but maybe that's just because of me. Which is it? Lincoln. Very good. Nearly there. Which major city has more canals than Venice? That's got to be straightforward. Birmingham. Very good. 100 miles. 2000. 2000. Absolutely right. As part of the Millennium Cities. Quite straightforward. London and life. And then Cornwall's population is smaller than that of Iceland. True or false? False. Look at that. It's bigger. Nearly double. This is a trick question for you. Where would you find Royston Vasey? In fact, the answer, as you may well know, is neither. It's Roy Chubby Brown's real name. Very good. Thank you very much for getting involved in that. I'm going to ask Joe to pick a winner for the iPod. If you could just reach in there. These are all the entries from in the room. If they're not in the room, then they don't get to keep it. So we're going to move on.
Kieran, which is the one with my name on it?
Who have we got? To be on the back here.
Monia Ladipo, DWP.
Hey, there you go. Congratulations. Congratulations. Well done. Well done, you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it just remains for me to say a huge thank you to all of you. We had 80-something or other in the room at the beginning, so that's not too bad, I think, for the last day. I'd like to thank the panel, Sir Michael Bichard, Joe Montgomery, and Trudy Elliott, and I thank all of you.
And thank you, Kieran, for facilitating. Thank you.
Thank you.